Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I'm going to let you into a little secret here. I enjoy serving you, my loyal audience, and chatting with a different person every single day about how they're using technology to make a difference out there, whether it be in the world or their industry or wherever. But the secret is I'm allergic to compliments, and today's guest told me she was a listener of the show and said some incredibly nice things, and thankfully I didn't have the video on while we were recording because I got a little embarrassed and red-faced. And I think it's because I often forget how many of you are listening all over the world out there, because essentially I'm in a room on my own talking into a microphone, and it almost feels weird when I meet a listener, but I must admit, it feels delightful in equal measure because it's you guys that make this show what it is. And although I'm rambling, what I'm trying to say is, in a rather long-winded way, is thank you for tuning into this podcast every day. So the lady I was talking about was Jennifer, and she is the CEO of a company called Enteros, the AI-powered multi-tier, multi-factor risk management platform. And I think risk management has been catapulted into the spotlight this year. And not only is she a lovely person, but she also has 25 years of industry experience managing risk in the global economy. And she also leads in helping Fortune 500 companies and major government entities assess risk factors through automating the discovery and response to third-party risk in every tier of global supply chains. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Washington so we can speak with Jennifer about all that and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Jennifer. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Neil. Jennifer Bisceglie, CEO and founder of Enteros. And if you think about it, in a world where COVID has changed us forever, and we're still waiting to see how to operate our global businesses in whatever we're going to consider to be the new normal, I'd like your listeners to really think about the uncertainty they're experiencing in their businesses and how it's keeping them from being able to make more informed moves based on who to do business with and where in the world to do that business. And if you think about it, there's some real game-changing decisions and opportunities in there. So for our customers, which are global governments and most of the Fortune 500 companies, this has historically been a choice of reacting to problems and disruptions after they happen versus leveraging artificial intelligence and technology to accurately anticipate the disruptions before they disrupt and identify and pre-solve problems before they happen, thereby giving these global companies the ability to turn disruptive change into their biggest advantage against their competition. So in a nutshell, what does Enteros do? We leverage automation and artificial intelligence to ingest over 100,000 globally and publicly available data sources through processes such as natural language processing or aggregating social media to map out a company's global supply chain relationships and ecosystems through multiple tiers and identify the global risks and opportunities across multiple risk factors. So everything from financial risk, like the solvency, liquidity, is that supplier going to be around tomorrow, to operational risk, everything from layoffs to counterfeit concerns to governance. Ethical sourcing is a big deal for a lot of our customers these days. Geographic risks, so think about weather patterns, or like you and I were just talking about, geopolitical concerns, or cyber, which is obviously a really big deal. So we're able to provide near real-time indicators of what a company can do to anticipate that unknown risk impact and take action.
For people listening that are tuning in and hearing about you guys for the very first time, can you possibly set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about those kind of problems that you're solving for businesses right now?
Yes. So if you would have talked to me back in January, Neil, our biggest problems were around countries that were potentially prohibitive or sensitive based on political or trade concerns, Or, as I mentioned before, counterfeits, layoffs, is that business just going to be around tomorrow that I want to partner with? Today, because of COVID, two big problems that our customers are coming to us with. One is, where are our suppliers being impacted by COVID? And then what's the alternative? And so there's a couple different variants to that. One is around concentration risk. And so I think if you think about what happened with COVID right at the beginning, and you had Apple saying they weren't going to hit their earnings, or you had the global pharmaceutical market that really had a problem, because even though the finished goods were coming out of China, we realized that a lot of our ingredients that were going into our global pharmaceuticals were all in India. And so that's a heavy concentration for any market to realize they are beholden to a specific region, a country, or a company. So that concentration risk, and really understanding, one, you have a concentration risk. Two, what the alternatives is really a big problem we're working with our customers on, in addition to simply alternative sources of supply, and where are ports or labor really having problems because of COVID.
So how does it work? Do you have any use cases of how you actually providing this real-time continuous monitoring of the health and stability of any company's hundreds of thousands of business partners? Because there's so much that you do here, isn't there?
It really is. And I think that last point that you just mentioned is really true. It's really hard to put your arms around your global supply chain, because it's not linear, as we like to talk about. It's not simply, who's built. And it's not just looking at a laptop as a finished good and all the 400 parts that went into the laptop. Yeah. It's all the other suppliers and customers and business partners of all of the suppliers that went into those 400 parts that went into that laptop. And so what we do is we literally map out all of those global business relationships, and we continuously monitor. So not just visualize what that looks like. And in my mind, I always think about it. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. If you're listening to familiar with that, it's we watch the businesses do business together, and then they separate. And in my mind, it kind of looks like a spider web. So you as a company are the center of the spider web, and your suppliers and their business partners just keep going further and further out. And so we visualize that. And then we continuously monitor, so we're able to say, your tier 3 supplier in this part of the world providing this part to you just had a cyber breach. What's the impact to your business? That's a perfect example of how someone would use us. Or one of our biggest customers here in the United States is NASA. And they're continually, from a technology standpoint, ensuring, based on global trade secrets, innovation, that we're not sharing secrets with companies in countries that might want to steal our technology from the United States. And so a couple of real examples of how folks are using us.
Incredibly cool. And like you were saying a few moments ago, the problems that you were solving for businesses and the kind of problems that they were coming to you and asking for your help with in January is completely different to what you're dealing with now. And on that subject, I read recently, I think, that Enteros experienced a 500% increase in inbound requests since March 2020. So can you tell me a little bit more about how the onset of COVID-19 has driven this greater need for visibility into risk?
Well, I think that for the first time, and I've been in this industry a very long time, over 20 years. And when I say this industry, global supply chains and technology and supply chain risk, I was there when the US and every country started becoming part of this global economy. And now we're so hyper connected to each other, it's near impossible to separate that. Yeah. To your point, when COVID happened, the customers that we worked with or that we were surrounded with came to us and said, we always knew that we had kind of like a black hole or a dark spot of where our sub-tier suppliers were. Now we know that that's a problem. And so for the first time ever in 20 some years in this industry, the topic of global supply chain risk is on the CEO and the board's desk in a way that I've simply never seen before. When I started back in the 90s, this was a warehouse transportation dialogue, which doesn't get anybody out of bed in the morning and get excited necessarily. And having said that, now you're looking at global multinational companies that are coming together. And two big things are happening. One is you're seeing the rise of the establishment of a new role called a chief risk officer that has been in different industries and companies before, but now the power of this chief risk officer and their dotted line to the CEO and the board is something that hadn't been there before. The other thing is that you're seeing a lot of cross-enterprise risk committees being stood up, again, elevated. They very often were behind or below a general counsel or a CFO or chief financial officer. Now, again, they have that CEO and board level visibility.
And your most recent white paper covered how organizations must begin to start assessing cyber risks to cope with ongoing tectonic shifts that are transforming globalization at the moment. So for anyone that hasn't seen that or heard about that, though, can you just tell the listeners a little bit more about your findings there?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. So there's kind of four big areas of top concern, especially when you talk about the re-globalized world and the ecosystems being interconnected, and especially around the cyber. As I mentioned before, cyber, much like the global supply chain, is something without borders. And so you can't put your arms around it. You don't know where the stop is. So very often, you don't know where the vulnerabilities lie. Four big areas we're seeing are top concerns. One is just simply the shutdown of internets, where you have government-led internet blackouts that are there to suppress anti-government dissent. You see this in a lot around social media, trying to shut down social media. It's the only way to do it. Just in 2019, we found that there were 33 incidents across various countries, which is a little scary, but it's a sign of the times, if you will. The second thing that we see, and this again is very country and regional dependent, is the government mandated access to data. And I know when the US really started offshoring and a lot of manufacturing moved to China, we experienced the mandate that if you were going to move your manufacturing to China, part of the agreement was simply that you provided them your intellectual property. It's now gone even broader, and now it's access to all data that's communicated, which again is a little bit of a control, but is the world we live in. The third is simply supply chain risks, where we're seeing supply chain attacks. The attack of a supply chain from the sub-tiers has increased by 78%, again, going back to 2019 when the findings were collected. And 60% of those supply chain attacks were via data breaches from the third-party vendors. So for your listeners that are familiar with the very famous one that impacted Maersk, that came from a third-party tax accounting software package that literally took a global company like Maersk back to paper and pens in effort to conduct their operations. It's scary how vulnerable we can be. And the last piece is simply just the world we live in and that growing compliance challenge around prohibited partnerships. Here in the States, again, we have a big focus on looking at 5G. And it's not just in the States. There was actually an article just recently about the UK and several other developed countries noticing that you have about 4 to 5 companies in one region of the world that is not only owning the standards for technology in 5G, but also all the technology manufacturing of that, which is a little unnerving, again, from a concentration risk, as well as just from an overall control, having one area of the world responsible for the critical technology infrastructure for every other developed and undeveloped country. So that would be the fourth, is the prohibited partnerships based on sensitive country concerns.
And something else that I think we've all seen this year was how fragile the supply chain has been or can be. So do you have any suggestions for businesses looking to make sense of their supply chain, especially during COVID-19?
Yeah, I think that it's really getting back to basics. So as much as we talked a lot about really global problems and big, meaty issues during this podcast, it's really getting back to basics of understanding what's important to your organization, to your company, to your customers, and having some sort of business continuity or resiliency plan around that. And that takes on different flavors based on the industry, the part of the world. And again, you can't protect everything in your global supply chain to the same level. So really prioritizing, and when we work with customers, understanding what the crown jewels are, if you will, is really important to build that resiliency plan around.
One of the things I always try and do on this tech podcast as well is ask guests if there are any myths or misconceptions that you might want to finally lay to rest today, especially someone in your area of expertise in your industry. I suspect there's going to be a few, but is there anything that you'd like to share and finally lay to rest today?
Well, I think as we just talked about resilience,
Yeah.
it's not a once and done thing, and it's certainly not a quick overnight thing. It's not like, okay, we're back up to operating and it can be fixed tomorrow. This is something, it's an investment for an organization. And then the other thing is it's a continuous monitoring responsibility. And I think going back to our platform and our technology, that's been the biggest education and cultural shift, Neil, is that historically, and even, when Enteros started 15 years ago, when I started this business, we started with consultants. And when you do that with people, it's one and done, right? The people do it, they do their research, they provide a report, and that's it. And gone are those days, because as I mentioned, we are so hyper connected as a global economy that it's the unknown risks, it's the non-obvious connections that cause some sort of a ripple effect to you and your business. And so the only way to do this is through a longer term business resiliency investment, as well as continuous monitoring.
And of course, it has been a bad year, but 2021 promises, or at least we hope it will be much better. But how do you see technology helping your industry to get back on its feet?
Well, I think the unique thing is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it is on the CEO and the board's desk. And I do think there's an appetite to invest. So as much as, the folks, the chief risk officers and organizations that were trying to get the attention of their leadership to say, this is really the soft underbelly of our global enterprise, this being our supplier base and our supply chain connections. And if we don't invest in it, something's going to happen. Well, something happened. So now I think that appetite is there for the investment. And so really putting this plan together and leveraging technology to build the resilience and the agility is really pivotal for the future of supply chain risk management and the future of our global business economy.
And looking towards the next year and beyond, is there anything that particularly makes you hopeful about the road ahead?
From a business standpoint, yeah, I think that, I like to tell people, I don't know if I like to tell people, but I do tell people, I thought supply chain risk was cool before it was cool. And I think that the unfortunate situation, and it was unfortunate for a lot of us, COVID-19 educated the world, and this disruption educated the world companies that they really need to invest in technology, and that we can't just leave it as a blind spot, our supply chain. We actually have to pay attention to it. And so I think that has me heartened from a business owner standpoint. I also think just as a consumer and a taxpayer, Neil, that the companies that are going to win, the companies that are going to be around for me, for my family, for my friends to buy from and to partner with, are those that invest in this, in their global supply chain and the technology and continuous monitoring. So I think it's ultimately, I'd love to see it be a win-win for everybody in 2021.
Let's hope so. And for anyone that would like to find out any more information about anything that we've talked about today, including that white paper, what's the best way of finding you online and equally contacting your team if they've got any questions?
Oh, thank you for asking. So our website is interos.ai. It's I and as in Nancy, TEROS and Sam.ai. Or they can connect with us on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter at Enteros Inc.
Fantastic. Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode, just so people can find you nice and easily. It has been a topsy-turvy year, to say the least, maybe even turbulent, but you guys having had a 500% increase in inbound requests since March 2020. So it shows you're doing something right this year. So I love how you're evolving and adapting with the landscape. And I'd love to continue to follow you guys and maybe get you back on next year and see how that journey's going and share some of more of your insights. But more than anything, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. We look forward to continuing the conversation.
Wow, Jennifer is an incredibly cool lady, and I could have listened to her talk for hours about their technology and how it's helping the industry get back on its feet, especially if she throws in the odd compliment about the show too. Seriously though, I mean, after chatting with her today, it's easy to see why the company has seen exponential growth as a result of their innovative approach to automation and achieving 961% revenue growth since January 19. And also evident through Enteros's 500% increase in inbound requests since March this year really does show how the onset of COVID-19 has driven a greater need for visibility into risk, a level of visibility that can only be achieved through the use of technology. But over to you. I'd love for you to share your stories too. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find links to all my social channels and over 1,400 interviews. So we are at the end of another episode, but I invite you to join me to do it all again tomorrow as we race towards the end of 2020. And hopefully you'll join me in ushering in a new year of opportunity. But I did say that last year. We know how that ended up. But I will speak to you all again tomorrow. But thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.